Hi folks, it's a real pleasure today to speak with former Governor Scott Walker. Scott Walker was the governor of Wisconsin and became quite well known for standing up to the unions. He ran for president, and today he heads the Young America's Foundation organization, which is one of the most important organizations in America today and has been for many years. So first, welcome to our studios. And let me ask you first, what led you in the direction of taking over the helm of Young America's Foundation?
Ron Robinson, big fan of his over the years, and Ron talked about his retirement. He was there for 43 years, but he had this great long-term plan. You know, sometimes with some of the groups we've seen over the years in DC, people don't make that sort of planning, but he really wanted to make sure that all the work he had done with students, with activists, with supporters and staff was fulfilled. And so he came to me after our second term was over and said, hey, would you even consider this? For me, the big thing was I said, I love the group. Tonette and I had been longtime supporters, loved working with young people, but I said to him and the board, I'm interested if you want to do more. What you do well, and I don't want to change the fundamentals, but I want to reach more people on more campuses and at a younger age, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Good for you. We looked at some polling a couple of months ago, and you and I spoke about this at a meeting that we had, and it is troubling because all of us, to one degree or another, have wanted to reach young people, use Governor and us at the Media Research Center, but the fact of the matter is they're slipping away from us. And they were the strongest base of support for Ronald Reagan. Most people used to think it was little old ladies with blue hair. It wasn't. It was young people, 18 to 25. And yet, if you look at the polling data now, they're 2-1 against us. And that's why it is so important what it is you're doing. Speak to the big issue on college campuses right now, the critical race theory. Mark Levin's new book, I interviewed him last week, and it's a phenomenal book. He traces it back to Marx himself.
100% right, yeah.
How do you see it playing out on campuses?
Well, and let's be clear, it is state-sanctioned, government-sanctioned racism. I mean, think about Martin Luther King and his I Have a Dream speech where he talked about, amongst other things, wanting his children, and part of his dream was his children would grow up in a society where they'd be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And yet
I got to interrupt before you say anything. Isn't it amazing that conservatives are all quoting King today?
Right, yeah.
And it's the left that is practicing the arts of racism? Anyway, go ahead.
Well, think about that. I mean, I was even worried last year during the riots and the chaos and that they'd even do horrible things to King statue down off the mall, because it's more of a Malcolm X and less of a Dr. Martin Luther King type focus that we see on the radical left these days. But I really agree. I think Mark is on to something. We've been laying that out. You go all the way back to, why did Marxism fail in the past? Well, because we're not a class-based society. You can be the poorest of the poor, and whether it's Ronald Reagan or Barack Obama, obviously one I love and one I didn't care for, but both of them came out, and many others have come out of very humble backgrounds and became president of the United States. That's because we're not a class-based society. So what did Marxists do? They circled back and came back to fighting pitting one group versus another, creating that rage. They're doing it on race, they're doing it on sex, they're doing it on gender. And the place we see it first and foremost is not only in our colleges, but increasingly in our schools, and it's why parents are rising up as well.
What do you tell your chapters where it comes to the rioters, the troublemakers? It's serious stuff, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, you see the physical harm and damage. In some ways, it's where maybe different on scale, but when I think about the 100,000 protesters and the death threats we had years ago in Wisconsin when I was governor, I can relate to many of these young people. It may not seem like the same volume, but for them and their lives, it's not just a liberal professor. We've talked about liberal professors for years. This is cancel culture in its extreme, where it's not just the professors, it's the students, it's the activists, it's the others embedded on those campuses. And so it's so important, not only for groups like Young America's Foundation, but to partner with so many others. And anybody listening or watching, say, just mentor, support people, let them know they're not alone, because that's the strategy of the left, is to intimidate all of us, to make us feel like we're somehow outcast, to cancel us. That's what cancel culture is all about. We let them know, we make inroads, that's where we win.
Now, you and I participated in a meeting about a month ago, and with a number of other conservative leaders, and I just found it fascinating, the survey that we took, that we all looked at, that showed you, if you believe the media, you will believe that we are in the minority and we are Cro-Magnons or something. But if you look at the polling data on issue after issue after issue after issue, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90% of the American people are actually on our side.
Exactly.
And this really does become a pro-America v. anti-America proposition. These aren't the liberals of Joe Lieberman or George McGovern or even Ted Kennedy.
Right.
They've gone beyond that. These people don't want to make a better America. They want to destroy America. We got to be clear about that.
I was just talking about that this morning, where you think about exactly right. People in the past, and I was a lawmaker a long time ago. I respected those who were liberal, even if I didn't agree with them, because they felt their ideas were better. It was my case to counter that and make a compelling argument. But I didn't question their loyalty to America, or in this case to the state as well. Today, the things they're teaching our young people, again, the earliest of ages, are to hate America, that somehow there's something wrong with this country, wrong with our founders, wrong with our founding principles, wrong with the American flag, and wrong with people who don't look like them, which is counter everything we've talked about. The week of Independence Day, a poll came out very similar to ones we've talked about in the past, where the good news was overwhelmingly people were proud to be Americans. For all the talk about race, not only was Americans as a whole, I think out of everybody out there, only 6% of all the people surveyed said they were not proud to be Americans. And of that, I think it was 7%, a mere 7% of people who were black respondents, and I think it was a point or two higher for Hispanic. But everybody else was either exceptionally or very proud or some degree of proud. The one group that was off on that, only 36% of 18 to 24-year-olds were extremely or very proud to be Americans. And what you see that in the schools. They're telling them there's something wrong. We've got to counter that. Reagan warned about this. Remember back in his farewell address? He talked about the need for American history and shared civic ritual. We've fallen away from both.
Isn't it? Yeah, Newt took a survey, which I thought was so interesting, where he asked black people, because you hear the media, the left reference them as people of color, and he asked blacks, would you rather be called a person of color or an American? And 86% said American.
Yeah.
So Newt said in the future, when you're doing an interview, and the interview brings up people of color, you cut them off and you say, no, they're Americans.
Yeah.
That's how you bring them back to our side.
Well, and that's a key thing, I think, for anybody, particularly for our young people. Because one of the interesting things we found in our research is on college campuses, particularly amongst undecided, persuadable young people, is they are really turned off by the divisiveness. And I love to encourage our students on campus to do this. Point at the left, the radicals, they're the divisive one.
Right.
If you don't agree with them, you're racist, you're sexist, you're a Neanderthal, you're homophobic, transphobic, you name it. Our counter as conservatives should be not to call them just different names. It should be to say, we love America.
Right.
We love this country so much. We want freedom and opportunity for everyone, whether you were born here or whether you legally came here from somewhere else. In fact, I often say, go find someone who's come from Cuba or Venezuela or Hong Kong or Eastern Bloc countries, because they and their families love America more than anyone I've ever met, because they know what the counter is to that.
Donald Trump, early on into his administration, labeled the media, who we all know he loved to pick fights with, he called them the enemy of the American people. That sounded pretty rough and maybe hyperbolic, but we do know that the media went apoplectic at the thought. A survey came out from Rasmussen last week and asked that question, are the media the enemy of the people? 58% of Americans believe that. That means every single one of Trump's voters and some of Biden's are saying that they are not that they are biased, not that they are distorting the truth, but that they are the enemy of America. Do you believe so?
Yes, and think of this long march. So Trump was the bravest of the brave to call them out on it. But I think all the way back to 2000, remember that close election, obviously, between Bush and Gore. I remember one of the interesting stories came out of CBS after that, where somebody was quoted saying, "I can't believe Bush won because no one I know voted for him." And it was just a great reminder of the bubble they live in. And it's the thing I encourage. I came from a blue state where we won 3 times, and I always reminded myself, get out of the bubble. I love being on Fox. I love being on talk radio. But get out beyond that and talk to people about everyday problems out there, because conservative ideas work. And that's what the media, I think, is lockstep, not just the left, but with a lot of these radicals on our college campuses and in our schools, and the teachers union bosses are part of it, where they just have this. I used to think it was unintentional, that they just bought into it, but I think for many in the media, they are clearly a part of this agenda as well, and it's all the more reason why we have to push back.
Couldn't agree more. Last question.
Yeah.
So we're witnessing in Texas right now, the legislature has fled rather than do their job. I think it happened in Wisconsin.
It did indeed.
Tell me what happened in Wisconsin, and what's your pearl of wisdom to your colleagues in Texas?
I'll start with the latter. Be patient, but be determined. For us, there's this sense that you want to settle everything right away. In Wisconsin, we went from an all-blue state to, at least temporarily, the legislature flipped, and obviously I was elected governor. We pushed some of the boldest reforms in the country, and I don't think they even did on their own. I think they got help from labor and liberal activists in Washington, much like the Texas crew is getting. They were told, little-known provision was, for an appropriation bill, you have to have a quorum, not just a majority. And so they left. They went over the state line. We sent out the state police. Like Texas, our jurisdiction stops at the state line. We did all sorts of things. We stopped depositing their paychecks into their bank account and printed them out and put them in the Senate desk that they had on the Senate floor. We did all sorts of things. In the end, in our case, we found a way to separate the appropriation from the reforms, did that, and then they had to come back. In Texas, it'll be a little bit different. Remember, Texas is historically a very part-time legislature.
Right,
so
right.
Most of these folks have jobs on either side of the aisle, and they can't hang out somewhere forever indefinitely on that. At least the average citizen can't get paid if they don't show up for work. So I'd say be patient, wait them out, be determined, and don't let the media change the narrative. The fact of the matter is, simple voter verification, simple voter ID requirements, having a same standard that isn't different in Houston than there's the rest of the state of Texas, those are all reasonable things. Tell that story over and over and over again. One of the mistakes I made early on, I was so eager to fix things, I didn't talk about them. Most politicians talk about them but don't fix them, so I guess I picked the better of the two. But I learned what they should do in Texas. You got to do both.
Right.
You don't just stand there and fix the problem. Constantly communicate to the people of Texas and America. Because remember, redistricting is coming up. In most states, the legislature will determine that. They need to know that conservatives are not going to back down.
Donald Trump was excessive sometimes. Donald Trump said things incorrectly sometimes. But at the end of the day, isn't it extraordinary that no one was despised more by the media than Donald Trump? And yet he talked to them every single day. He was talking over their heads to the American people, just like Ronald Reagan did. Yeah. They despised Reagan too, because they were communicating. Anyway, Governor Walker, you are, I really do believe it. I don't say these things lightly. I think you are a true leader in the conservative movement. I think you, of all the organizations that could use your leadership, YAF was one. Ron Robbins did an awesome job, and I envy whatever he's doing right now, but he earned every bit of it. But thank you for being here. Thank you for being at YAF, and thanks for everything you've done for America.
My pleasure. Same back at you.
Okay. Thank you, folks.